Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends. Guys, welcome back to r/MaliciousCompliance, where you'll hear super satisfying stories about people giving others what they deserve. And in this episode, a Karen learns that she messes with the wrong person. Guys, the stories in this one are absolutely incredible, so I do hope you enjoy them. And do remember to hit that subscribe button for future tales, if you're not subscribed. So, I'm a building manager, and I took over 2 residential apartment blocks. Part of my duties include assigning parking spots. Now, due to the incompetence and neglect of the previous management company, I inherited a parking lot which was a complete organizational disaster. There were multiple tenants believing that they had been assigned the same spot, and tenants were parking in spots but not paying, etc. And of course, the parking map, which was supposed to be regularly updated, had not seen an update in almost 16 months. So a situation arose where there were 2 tenants fighting over the same parking spot. Instead of coming to management to resolve, they engaged in a nasty war, which consisted of them leaving mean notes on each other's cars. Now, eventually this dispute spilled over, and I was contacted by one of them. The conversation was simple but plain. I expressed the understanding about their frustration, asked specific questions to help figure out who was originally assigned that parking spot, so on and so forth. I explained how the previous management failed to maintain order in the parking map, and that I would cheerfully resolve the issue. Now, instead of replying to my simple questions such as, when were you assigned that spot, when did you sign your lease, etc., they sent me an all-caps email that read, I do not have to answer any questions, and I expect this parking situation to be resolved immediately, with no more emails or text messages. Well, if they had just answered my questions, I could have resolved the situation. I expected that they were the original tenant to sign the spot, and it was indeed theirs. But since they would not answer any questions and insisted on the resolution immediately, I did what I could. I assigned the other tenant the spot. I then replied to them, in order to resolve the issue without communication, you are now assigned spot number 64. If you continue to park in spot 35, you will be towed immediately, as it is now assigned to a different tenant. Now, I gave them the spot right next to the dumpsters. Now they can enjoy the stench of rotting garbage and a cloud of wasp every time they go to the car, which is also 100 meters further away from the doors. So 2 days later, they approached me in person and apologized for their behavior. I told them, no worries, I don't hold grudges. They then asked if I could reassign them their old spot. I told them no, have a good day. Guys, that was a perfect malicious compliance. I love how that guy apologized for his behavior, thinking he'd get his old spot back. Like, the guy should have just answered those emails. There's no reason to be such a dink about it. So, a few years ago, my ex and I rented a 1-bedroom house on a dead-end street in the downtown area of the city I grew up in. We had 3 cats, and I lived close enough to my job that I could walk to work every day. So, the landlord who owned my home had for some reason actually built 2 homes on the same property. There was mine, a small 1-bedroom home that sat maybe 6 feet away from the street, and my back neighbor's home, which was a 2-bedroom, just behind mine. There was also a long shared driveway on the left side of my house that ended at her front door. Now, from the beginning, we had issues with this neighbor who I'll call BN for bitchy neighbor. She would frequently invite herself over for dinner and drinks, and she would have people coming and going loudly at all hours of the night. She would also have police at her house constantly to kick out her various boyfriends. By the time we moved out, she had 2 people practically overdose and die in her home. And she also somehow caused an electrical fire in the house that had cost about $35,000 to repair. Now, keep in mind that this house was maybe 50 feet away from mine. Mostly, we just ignored her. The most we interacted was when I would give her her misdelivered mail. So back to the story. The driveway that led up to her front door was large enough to fit 4 cars. A fairly big deal in an area with mostly street parking. She yelled at us when we first moved in that we were not allowed to park in this driveway, that the driveway was only for her and her friends and her family. She told me many times that she would not allow anyone to block her car in at any time. And if I did, there's gonna be a problem. This driveway was directly on the side of my house. My desk was in our converted dining room and was right next to the driveway. Every morning, there was a car parked directly next to these windows. And every morning, that car started up crazy loud because it was a real piece of junk. I occasionally had family and friends come by and would warn them not to park in the driveway, but a few times they did. My sister was moving at one point and needed to store some things in my basement, but the only entrance was on the outside on the back of the house. So she pulled up in the driveway and started to unload boxes. My neighbor then flies out of her house and she flips out. Now, my sister has her own anger issues and she handled that situation all on her own. My neighbor did this to 2 of my friends, my brother, and my mom on separate occasions. And one time, she started to flip out on my grandfather until she saw my mother come up from the trunk of the car with his wheelchair. My ex and I did not want to deal with her. We had our own problems and certainly didn't want to get involved in hers. Sure, it means we can't use the side door of our house that led onto the driveway, but we just decided to adapt. We had some lawn on the other side of our house that was brown and overgrown with poison ivy. We decided to clean it up, fill it up with gravel, and made it our new parking spot. And voila, crisis was averted. And then comes winter, a particularly bad winter. We had a foot of snow pile up. My ex had gone out and shoveled out our car and a path from our front door to the car. He was out there every hour, clearing off the path and the car and laying down rock salt. My neighbor was pissed. We could hear her in the driveway yelling at her boyfriend of the week to shovel. We could hear her saying all kinds of bad things about us. And we could hear when she broke her shovel, threw it in the yard, and stormed back into her house. So later that day, a plowing company came. 2 guys dug out the cars, neighbors moved them, and they plowed their driveway. They even did their front steps. They were gone in about an hour. Then the landlord shows up. Now, the landlord never shows up to the property unless there's a big deal. My ex and I were in the kitchen at the time, and we could hear my neighbor's loud conversation about how expensive the plowing company was and how there was still so much snow on the driveway, as it was still snowing. Then the landlord knocks on our side door. I open it with a big smile and said, "Oh, hi landlord, how are you?" My neighbor then shoves a paper at me. It's the invoice from the plowing company. My neighbor says, "So I'm sure you noticed that we've had the driveway professionally plowed." I talked to the landlord and she says that you have to pay half this bill. I told her, yeah, I'm not gonna do that. She replies, "It's expensive, we have to split the cost." I told her that's nice, but I'm not paying for that. "You have to." I told her, actually, I don't. I didn't know you were getting a plow guy, and I don't use the driveway. The landlord then says, "Well, if service is performed on the shared parts of the property, you should split the costs." Neighbor looks at me and says, "See, you have to." Now at this, my eyes narrow as I turn back to look at her and said, "You've made it very clear that this is not my driveway. You've made it clear multiple times that I'm not allowed to park in it. I had to make my own parking space. You can pay for your own driveway." Now at this, my neighbor was speechless. She really thought that I would have just done what she wanted. The landlord then says, "You made your own parking space?" I told her yes. I've been told since I moved in that I'm not allowed to park in the driveway and I'm not allowed to block her car at any time. She's yelled at everyone who's come here to visit me that's parked in the driveway, even if they're stopping by for a few minutes. My neighbor finally looks ready to re-enter the fight, but landlord speaks first and says, "Thank you, OP. Enjoy the rest of your night." I smiled at them, closed my door, and I locked it. I could hear my neighbor trying to argue with the landlord, and I could even hear her walk up and down my steps wanting to knock on my door again. But the landlord was firm. She had to pay for the bill herself. And after that, she let me park in the driveway too. Guys, I love how OP's patience finally paid off. But honestly, she should have spoken up from day one and talked to the landlord. Like, there's no way she should have had to put up with her neighbor's entitlement at all. And I'm so glad her jerk neighbor got stuck paying for that snow removal. So I work in college dorms in a sort of generic first response role. We do a bit of everything, mostly security, but also medical, fire, psych, etc. It's a weird and often tough job, but quite rewarding. Now these dorms are kind of like a gated community, a couple miles away from the main campus. At the top of this village, there's a hub where all the staff are based. It also serves as a venue for events and also has some facilities for the students, such as catering, gym, etc. Between the staff parking spots and the back doors, there's also disabled parking spaces. Now, one day, I was coming in from my 10-hour night shift, and to my dismay, I found that all the staff parking spots were occupied, which basically never happens. I knew that the HR department had a big thing there that afternoon, so I figured that's what was going on. And although it's not technically against the parking policy usually, staff who actually don't work in the building are expected to park in the visitor parking bays, not the staff parking. So I had a problem. It was 10 minutes before the start of my shift. Now, I'm not allowed to use the student car parks, but what about visitor parking? Well, that gets locked up every night, until after my shift ends. If I park there, then in the morning, I'd have to go unlock the visitor parking, bring the key back, leave, and one of my day shift colleagues would have to go back to lock it up. Now, my only other option was to park down the hill, but then by the time I got there and walked back up, I'd be late for my shift and miss the handover. You see where this is going. I want to make it clear that I would never normally park in a disabled parking spot. However, there weren't any events scheduled that night, so after the HR thing was done, the parking lot will be empty all night. I also want to note that there are 3 handicap parking spots. So with that said, I decided that I would park in one of the handicap spots, the one furthest from the door, next to the staff spaces. Now, in the extremely unlikely event that more than 2 disabled people had called in to park and access the building, which I'd find out about during handover, I would just take a break right after starting. I would drive my car all the way down the hill and then walk back up. So I go in, get the handover, and as expected, no one is expected to come in. I was the supervisor for the shift, so I set up my colleagues for the shift, log on, set up the cameras the way I want them, read my emails, turn on the radio, yada yada yada. After a while, I get one of the guys, Phil, to cover the cameras, so I can go tell a resident that he's getting disciplined for vandalism. Now, I then have one of those golden sitcom moments where I open the office door right before someone was about to knock on it. I recognize her immediately. This woman is the Dean of Facilities. We'll just call her Karen. Now, I want to make it clear that we are not in the facility section. We are in the auxiliary service section. So this lady is not my boss in any capacity. But she is, however, far up in the food chain than me, so I still have to bow down to her or I'll get called into HR for insubordination, especially since the building we're in is technically operated by the facility section. Now, some more context. Karen's one of the most hated figures among the low-level staff in the entire college. The classic power-tripping person who doesn't deserve to be in the position of power. Now, you can practically see the arousal in her eyes whenever she talks down to anyone on a lower salary than her, which is all the time. So a startled Karen practically pushes me back in the office, and it turns out that she was attending whatever the event the HR department had going on, and she was one of the people that parked in the staff spaces out back. Now, she doesn't have an office in the building, so by convention, she should be parking in the visitor spaces. Anyway, she saw my car parked in the handicap spot on the way back to her car. She knows who I am. We've had numerous interactions in the past, and she saw my name on the staff sticker in my windshield. So she starts off very smugly and says, "So, I have a question. Where do you get off thinking that you can park in a handicap spot?" I told her the parking spots were full, and no one's expected to be here after hours and would need to park there. Karen then says, "Oh, so now you think you're above the rules just because you're the one who enforces them?" I told her, "Look, it's no big deal. I'll go move the car when everybody leaves the event." Karen says, "Oh, no, not on college's time you don't." I told her, "Okay, then I'll take it off my break." She says, "No, breaks are for relaxation. Moving your car is not relaxation." I then asked her, "Well, then what do you want me to do?" So Karen then says, "As a dean here, I want you to issue yourself the standard $70 fine." See what I mean about the power trip? I asked her, "Are you serious?" She says, "Absolutely. You need to learn that you don't make the rules, you just enforce them." Now at this point, I do stare at her in disbelief. Now I do have a very short fuse at the best of times, and I really want to yell bloody murder at her, but I value my job. So I swallow my pride and go write myself a ticket. So a little bit more context here. We're essentially subcontracted by the city to do parking and traffic enforcement for all roads and parking on college land. So the authority behind these tickets is the city, not the college. I then go talk to the kid who vandalized stuff and came back about 45 minutes later. Now bear in mind that Phil, my buddy who I put on the cameras, witnessed the whole thing. I come back and ask him if he saw her leave, and he says, "She's about to leave now. But it's weird, she's leaving through the front." Now, Karen regularly comes here to use the gym at the end of the workday, as it's free for students and staff. And that's presumably what she's doing today too, seeing as it's been 45 minutes since she's humiliated me. So when she does that, she usually takes a cab home, because she lives at the opposite end of the city and traffic's a nightmare at this time in the evening. She then gets her husband to drive her back in the morning to pick up her car, and she drives to the main campus. So it's now that I make a beautiful realization. I then pull up the parking policy, scroll through it, and there it is, in delicious bold lettering. It says, "It is not permissible for members of the staff to leave their cars parked in a staff parking area during non-working hours." It then lists a few exceptions, none of which applies to Karen. So I'm about to write a ticket when I have an even better idea. You see, our cameras are pretty snazzy. About 6 years ago, all the cameras in the parking lot were updated to plate recognition cameras by the city. So now, on top of the 40 days of saved camera footage, we also have the plate log, which has been kept indefinitely and can be used to figure out when a car enters the compound and when a car leaves, since we only have 3 entry and exit roads. I then explained my plan to Phil. He has absolutely no problems doing me a favor and spending time going back through the plate log system to see how many times Karen has left her car parked there overnight. So 4 hours later, and he's assembled all the dates. Over the past 4 years and however many months, weeks, days since the plate system came online, Karen has left her car overnight on a staggering 585 separate occasions. So I log into the city's Find Portal software. Yep, that's actually what it's called, as you can only write tickets for ongoing and momentane violations. If you spot something using auxiliary systems like cameras or what have you after the fact, you need to issue a fine by mail. So I put in her office address and start entering all 585 dates and times, and copy and paste the reference to the exact part of the parking policy, as well as the city statute that gives the policy the force of law for each single one. Now, the result is the thing of beauty, spanning 13 pages and totaling $40,950 in violations. Now at this point, all the guys are in the back of the office, so I call them around, knowing that they'll all enjoy this almost as much as me. When I press the login print button, I'm hit with a warning that I've never seen before. It says, "The fine you're about to issue exceeds $10,000. Are you sure you wish to proceed?" At this point, everyone's dumbstruck. I start laughing, then Phil starts laughing, and everybody else. It's glorious. So I then print it, stuffed it in a windowed prepaid city envelope, and put it in the external mail. The cherry on top is, I then get to issue a ticket and put it on her windshield, because of course, she's also there that night. Of course, the next time I come into work after she receives this, she's waiting for me in my office, and she says, "What are you doing? Do you really think this is gonna fly?" I then look at her with puppy dog eyes and say, "What do you mean?" She says, "The ticket, the fines, do you really think this will fly?" I told her rules are rules. She says, "You know as well as I do that that's never actually been done here." I then tell her, "Well, Karen, I don't make the rules, I just enforce them." She then leaves after 5 minutes of screaming at me basically. Now, there is more to this, some good, some bad, and I'll start with the bad. Karen ends up suing, and I had to go to court on my day off. But the silver lining is I was theoretically there representing the city, so I wasn't being sued personally, and I had the city attorney. Now, the court did end up reducing the fine to $10,000, which was apparently the city's maximum for post-facto fines issued at one time, and I guess that's why the warning was there. Karen had sued to get the fine dismissed entirely, so it was still a victory kinda. She also tried to take it up with HR, but the Dean of Auxiliary Services also hates her, and he stuck up for me to HR. That went nowhere. But the best thing though is this year, I was appointed to the Auxiliary Services Policy Review Board, and last week I managed to get the parking policy amended. It now says that if staff is visiting a building other than where their office is, unless they're teaching a class, they need to use visitor parking if there are fewer than 20 staff parking bays at the building. So starting in June, Karen will not be allowed to park in the staff spots at all. And of course, all of us will be vigilantly enforcing that. My friends, this malicious compliance is absolutely brilliant. I enjoyed it so much, and even a $10,000 fine is absolutely outrageous, so I hope she learned a lesson from that. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the stories today, and if you missed the last episode on the channel, I will link it right here. A freeloading mom calls the cops on her son for locking her out of his house. It's such a crazy entitled story, guys, so check it out if you haven't, and I'll see you guys in the next one. I love you.